Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. With your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. To purchase and book sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. Now your host, AJ Mahari.
A couple things before we start this episode. I have a website for this podcast, and it's at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. Interactive website. It's a website is its own feed for the podcast and also for my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to get a lot of the videos that aren't in this podcast, you'd like to check those out, you can do that at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. I would just like to encourage you to please leave a 5-star rating for this podcast if you find it helpful, to help this podcast keep growing and keep reaching more and more people who could benefit from this content. I get a lot of people with BPD rating it at 1 star because, they have all these problems with what I'm saying, and they think it's horrible and disgusting and all that kind of BPD kind of stuff. This podcast website is survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. And now, let's dive into today's episode. A quiet borderline female may be like, I want to have a baby, like right now, want to move in, want to get married, all of that. And it's like, maybe all you, and this could happen at any point in a relationship. Maybe you've been together for like 6, 7, 8 months or a year. And the thing is, these are often the red flags of the quiet borderline. I want to have a baby now. How come we haven't moved in yet? We got to get married. And things like that happen, like they're just so intense and they're trying to sort of seal the deal. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 10 reasons why quiet BPD still destroys relationships. Firstly, let me just point out that the subtype of BPD known as discouraged, which is also known as the quiet borderline or quiet BPD, are really not, quote, less borderline, unquote. Though many people trying to stay in relationships with a quiet borderline believe they have, quote, milder BPD, unquote, which is not necessarily true or accurate. And then when people talk about BPD as a spectrum, I don't know, quote, disorder, unquote, that word really, it has a little bit of application, but not as much as most people think either, because when people have BPD, they have the core of what that means, and the core of identity diffusion, the lost self, etc. So I have a little bit of a tad long introduction in this, but maybe it won't be so long once I actually say it, but it's important. So introduction. In today's episode, as I talk about and take a closer look at a form of borderline personality disorder, as I said, that is often misunderstood, minimized, or even romanticized, I'm going to be delving into quiet borderline personality disorder, subtype, discouraged borderline. Because the behaviors of quiet BPD, or people with quiet BPD, are turned inward on themselves, acted out inward on themselves, rather than acted out outwardly and aimed at you or anyone close to them, or, quote, object other, unquote, many partners or even exes or on and off in the relationships with someone with quiet BPD assume these relationships are calmer, safer, maybe even healthier. The person with quiet BPD doesn't explode in rage as often, or if at all, as a petulant borderline would. And they withdraw instead of confronting, very avoidant, extremely shame-based, and they may appear agreeable, composed, or even high-functioning. But beneath that exterior, beneath how they, quote, don't manifest this, unquote, outwardly, is the same storm that fuels all forms and patterns of borderline personality disorder, communication issues, relational challenges, object-other relating, lack of object constancy, and BPD splitting. And the thing with the quiet borderline, a lot of people with quiet BPD When they split, that's often when they withdraw, or they go quiet, or they need space, or they might have ghosting patterns in which then they're going to come back to you, but they ghost for like hours or a day or maybe 2 weeks or a week or weeks. Like they can have different patterns. But when they split, they might ghost, and or you might not know they're splitting at all. So this is why a lot of people think that the quiet borderline is, quote, less borderline. Because the experience can be very different on the other side. Like if you're close to someone with BPD, or you were the partner of someone with BPD, or you are now. But there's a lot that goes misunderstood and unknown that the person with BPD, with quiet BPD, is going through. So people with BPD, by the way, especially untreated, they don't know who they are, but they hate themselves. And everything about what you might experience outwardly from somebody who's maybe not a quiet borderline, the quiet borderline is pummeling themselves with internally. And the other thing, too, is that many people with quiet BPD will not rage, will not show you the split, will not act anything out because they're acting it in. But many people with quiet BPD may sometimes rage, may sometimes show you something outwardly because, as I'm going to talk about in this episode of this podcast, not all of the subtypes, discouraged or quiet BPD, they can overlap for some people with BPD. And for some people, for other people with BPD, they can be just discouraged quiet borderline and not have overlaps with the petulant or other two types of BPD. One of the most overlooked aspects of quiet BPD is the prevalence of substance abuse, alcoholism, and addiction, which of course we find in the other subtypes, but it just manifests, and it means it's just different with quiet borderlines to some degree. Because they internalize their pain, many people with quiet BPD turn to alcohol, drugs, food, gambling, shopping, or compulsive behaviors as a way to quiet, or try to quiet, the unbearable emotional noise inside, the unbearable pain. And they're trying to soothe themselves because they don't know how to emotionally soothe themselves. And even if they knew how to soothe the self, they don't know the self that they would need to soothe. To an outsider, quiet BPD might look like, or these behaviors might look like, well, just, quote, stress relief, unquote, or an occasional bad habit, when in fact it's a form of hidden self-harm, a slow destruction of body, mind, and consequently, more often than not, relationships as well. Alongside addiction, there's also self-sabotage that partners often don't even recognize as the self-harm that it is for people with quiet BPD. Missed opportunities, destroyed careers, quiet acts of self-punishment like neglecting health or sabotaging intimacy in subtle ways. All of these and more come from a place of deep, deep self-hatred. And it's a self-hatred of an entirely false self because they don't know themselves. And where the self-hatred comes from, many sort of aspects to it, but often it comes from neglect, abandonment, and trauma in childhood. When they're told by a parent or parents that they're no good, that they're just a problem, and when they're not seen and when they're not heard, and more. So this is why quiet BPD can be so dangerous in relationships, because the harm is just that, quiet. It often goes unseen until it has already eroded trust, stability, and maybe hope, or even maybe only one issue is ever talked about. Like, for example, everything seems to be going really well, and you have, maybe you're a man in a relationship with a female partner with quiet BPD. And your female partner with quiet BPD is adamant she wants to have a baby, for example, because this happens often with women with BPD, quiet or petulant or whatever the case. But in this example of a woman with quiet BPD, in the relationship, your partner is seemingly quite self-aware. Your partner has a kind, gentle, loving nature, no outward splitting on you. She's devaluing herself internally when she splits, no arguments, but she often expresses feeling confused in this example as to why you don't want to have a baby, like right now, or get married, like yesterday, or move in together right away. Or you might say to your partner, or you might have said to an ex with Quiet BPD, that in order to have a baby or get married and then have a baby or move in, that you, for example, if she's using alcohol a lot, abusing alcohol, you would like her to do something about that drinking before you can really make a commitment to more. You might think she just needs to drink less, for example. Use or abuse of alcohol to escape her internal emotional inability to cope, she's drowning inside, and you might not see or know that. And in therapy, she cannot be properly treated while not clean and sober. This example is one scenario of how so many partners or loved ones don't understand the depth of Quiet BPD because you don't experience it. It isn't shown or on display or ever really talked about. Or if it is talked about here and there, you might be confused yourself about what they're saying about maybe something going on inside of them because you can't fathom it, you can't relate to it, and you just don't really see with a person with Quiet BPD really a lot of the signs of BPD that the petulant borderline will be acting out and making quite evident. So from the example in my introduction to this episode, let's walk through 10 reasons why Quiet BPD still destroys relationships, still isn't healthy, and why people who are with a person with Quiet BPD, and it might seem like everything's going pretty fine, you still have codependency, and you might not even be aware of that or experiencing that consciously yourself. So I'm going to be breaking down the myths versus realities of Quiet BPD so you can clearly, or hopefully more clearly, see how these dynamics play out. The first reason why Quiet BPD still destroys relationship is anger. Anger is silent but still there. And the myth is Quiet BPD partners aren't angry or explosive, so the relationship feels calmer, and it might be calmer, but that doesn't mean it's healthier. The reality is the anger is still there, but instead of being directed at you, it's turned inward, fueling self-harm, drinking, or reckless coping in many ways. You may not get yelled at, but the relationship is quietly destabilized by your partner's war internally against themselves, and by you codependently enabling what might be going on for them, of which you may see very few signs. Like you might see somebody struggling with alcoholism, somebody like who really is drinking a lot, or using substances and that type of thing. And you might just think, well, that's the problem, right? Because maybe you don't get that underneath that there's borderline personality disorder in the quiet manifestation of said. The second reason why Quiet BPD still destroys relationships is that people with Quiet BPD, if they're splitting, if they're stressed in any other way, they withdraw, because withdrawal to them feels like safety, but it's abandonment. The myth is when they retreat or go quiet, it seems like they're giving space instead of causing chaos. The reality of it, though, is withdrawal is another form of abandonment. It can look like sulking, ghosting, could be ghosting for a while, or shutting down emotionally. And there's no room for you there when the quiet borderline is shutting down, withdrawing. They get really super cold without whatever they're feeling inside, but like you can experience it as silent treatment, punishment. Well, now they're all really cold, and there's just no room for you there, and there won't be much communication in these different times as well. And often during these withdrawals, substance abuse or self-sabotaging behavior increases. You are left confused and lonely while they drown silently in so much emotional dysregulation and despair. And the third reason why Quiet BPD still destroys relationships is that people with Quiet BPD masking their pain creates this sense of false stability in a relationship or in that person. And the myth is because they appear functional, agreeable, or even they seem pretty together, it feels like the relationship has fewer ups and downs. And the reality, the mask hides despair, addictions, and compulsions. The quote, stable, unquote, partner may secretly drink, this is the quiet borderline, may secretly drink every night, binge eat, overspend, punish themselves in ways that you just don't see. The calm of the exterior of the quiet borderline is an illusion. Beneath it, self-hatred drives destructive patterns of what the core and the meaning of borderline personality disorder is, no matter the presentation, that may eventually surface one way or another. And the fourth reason why quiet BPD still destroys relationships is that the quiet borderline, their shame is hidden behind perfectionism. The myth with that is their perfectionism makes them reliable, competent, and committed partners. But the reality is perfectionism is fueled by shame and self-loathing. When they inevitably, quote, fail, unquote, to meet their impossible standard, they may spiral into drinking, isolating, or sabotaging relationships, maybe by just a lot of ghosting or a lot of withdrawal. You end up living with the fallout of their shame storms, even when the storm is internal and quiet, and all you may know about it is that they're withdrawing, or they ghosted you again, or they're giving you what is for you the silent treatment because they need to withdraw. The fifth reason why quiet BPD still destroys relationships is fear of rejection is still the core driver. The myth with this is because they don't cling or explode, it feels like they're less afraid of being abandoned. But the reality is the fear is just as strong. The abandonment fear is just as strong. Instead of screaming, "Don't leave me," they silence their needs, people please, and sacrifice themselves. And this is largely from the core of BPD, but also people with BPD have severe codependency. But inside, they may be numbing the pain with substances or punishing themselves privately, which really poisons intimacy over time. The sixth reason why quiet BPD still destroys relationships, the emotional storms, the triggers, the emotional dysregulation, the splitting, all of these things that the petulant borderline makes clear are still happening inside of the quiet borderline. And the myth with this is since they don't act out, it seems like they manage emotions better. When the reality is the emotional dysregulation and the storms of rage inside are happening but not manifested outwardly. When you don't see tears or anger, you may assume things are fine. Meanwhile, your partner with quiet BPD might be self-harming in secret, drinking in isolation, or quietly planning to sabotage the relationship, and that's not necessarily consciously, because they feel unworthy of love. And the seventh reason why quiet BPD still destroys relationships is the illusion of closeness. And the myth with this is their quietness and sensitivity can feel like deep intimacy, like they really get you better. But the reality with that is what feels like closeness may actually be enmeshment mixed with silence. The relationship lacks true reciprocity. Over time, their hidden self-harm, substance abuse, or passive sabotage erodes the trust and intimacy you thought was there. The eighth reason why quiet BPD still destroys relationships is often around the issue of misdiagnosis. It creates false hope. The myth is because they seem more like they have anxiety or depression, it feels more treatable and therefore more hopeful. But the reality is quiet BPD is often mislabeled as just depression or just anxiety or both depression and anxiety. This leaves the root of the relational instability and the lack of self, lack of object consciency, the emotional immaturity. It leaves all of the core aspects of what the quiet borderline is going through unaddressed. Meanwhile, the person may self-medicate with substances, reinforcing both the misdiagnosis and enabling the cycle of destruction. The ninth reason why Quiet BPD still destroys relationships is overfunctioning or high functioning that really looks like, feels like, and seems like love. And the myth is when they overgive, rescue, or take care of you, it feels like they're devoted to you. But it can be deep, severe codependency within the person with BPD. They're coming from a place of overfunctioning or high functioning, but it's not really who they are, and it's not really anything that can be consistent. So the reality with this too is it's not sustainable intimacy. It's a strategy to avoid abandonment. Beneath the surface, the quiet borderline neglects their own needs, sometimes numbing themselves, again, with alcohol, compulsive behaviors, substance abuse, or other self-sabotage. The imbalance quietly takes its toll and it starts to rupture relationships. And like I gave in the example before listing these 10 reasons, and I'm just about to get to the 10th reason, the example I gave of like all of a sudden a quiet borderline female may be like, I want to have a baby like right now, want to move in, want to get married, all of that. And it's like, maybe all you, and this could happen at any point in a relationship, maybe you've been together for like 6, 7, 8 months or a year. And the thing is, these are often the red flags of the quiet borderline. I want to have a baby now. How come we haven't moved in yet? We got to get married. And things like that happen, like they're just so intense and they're trying to sort of seal the deal because they think if you marry them and if you have a baby with them, that, that means you're not going to abandon them. And this isn't always a conscious thing. They may be the only signs of actual borderline personality disorder that you really see from a quiet borderline who doesn't have any other subtype features of BPD. So you're just not going to be seeing what's going on inside of them. And you're going to think that everything is way different than it really is for the quiet borderline. And the 10th reason why quiet BPD still destroys relationships is that the silence of the quiet borderline still equals chaos. And the myth is that quiet BPD relationships are calmer because there's less visible drama. The reality is the chaos is simply hidden. Silent treatments, secret addictions, unspoken resentments, all of these rot the foundation of what is still a trauma bond more than the foundation of some connected relationship. What looks like calm is really suppression, and suppressed chaos always finds some way to erupt. For the quiet borderline, those eruptions aren't necessarily going to be rage or outwardly, as could be the case if they are quiet borderline with some overlap of the petulant subtype of BPD. So the eruptions themselves often with a quiet borderline are confusing, not explained. You don't know what's happened or happening for them because the way the quiet borderline really, quote, erupts, unquote, is often by ghosting you. It's first withdrawal, and then it's I need space and withdrawal, and or it can be the ghosting of, quote, I need space, which when they have this pattern of coming back and withdrawing and ghosting and coming back, which, like I said, will get interrupted at some point anyway, if you don't get yourself out of there first, that can still happen. But then one time, coming sooner or later, they just won't come back because their eruption has now, or at that point, has become or will become a discard. Because the more that they say, I just need space, I just need time, and they don't explain for what, then eventually there's going to be a time when they don't come back. Because they just can't keep experiencing internally what they do when they're with you that has nothing to do with you. It's not your fault, but they will ascribe it to you and they won't show it outwardly. So the quiet borderline eruption is often ghosting and at some point a discard. even if there's been this recycling pattern that's been dependable of however long they withdraw and ghost for, and then they come back. But remember, there's going to be a time when that you'll get past the longest they've ever withdrawn and ghosted, and then maybe at that point or soon after, they're never coming back again. So make no mistake about it, even without overlap to the petulant subtype, quiet borderlines do, quote, erupt. But again, it's internal. You don't hear anything about it. You don't see any evidence of it. They withdraw and they ghost. And so in closing, a reflection. Quiet BPD may seem calmer, but it's not healthier. Addiction, hidden self-harm, and chronic self-sabotage are not signs of stability. The intensity of, we got to get married now. How come we're not married yet? We got to live together. Why haven't we moved in together yet? And I want a baby. I want a baby right now. These are some of the red flags that you'll see from a quiet borderline, that intensity, when you may not be picking up any other signs of instability or, in fact, BPD. And so the quiet BPD seeming calmer, but it's not healthier. The addiction, the hidden self-harm, and chronic self-sabotage are not signs of stability, like I said. They're signs of destruction happening out of sight. They're signs of a person with borderline personality disorder, all the core of what that means, who's drowning inside. These patterns erode relationships just as surely as shouting matches or public outbursts of the petulant borderline. When partners don't recognize these quiet but corrosive patterns, they're left carrying the burden of confusion, often loneliness in the quiet borderline's withdrawals or ghostings, and false hope. Quiet doesn't mean safe. Quiet BPD doesn't mean love can last. Quiet simply means the destruction is hidden until it eventually breaks through. And one way it might break through is somebody that's going out clubbing a lot, and maybe they're not getting, involved with anyone else, but they're going out because they got to drink, they got to party, they got to do whatever they got to do. This is all part and parcel often of addiction, and the way that you might come to realize that this person you're with, whether you know they have BPD or not, has BPD, is a quiet borderline, because maybe it's a drinking, maybe it's a substance abuse, maybe it's an eating disorder, maybe there's other symptomology there, but when you don't know what BPD is and you're in this relationship with somebody, or you were, then you just think that they're kind of like okay. Or you think, oh, well, maybe they have an eating disorder. Oh, maybe they have a bit of a substance thing happening, or they drink too much, but you still think otherwise they're okay. When these types of issues are the red flags of the quiet borderline. People with the BPD discouraged subtype, I want to say once more, known as quiet BPD, are really not, quote, less borderline, unquote. Though many people trying to stay in relationships with them believe they have, quote, milder BPD, unquote, which is not true or accurate. And people with somebody with quiet BPD, if you start to realize that, and then you wonder what to do, or you realize you need to leave the relationship, and maybe what you're really knowing is, maybe you know they have BPD right now. Maybe they've expressed it to you, but you still haven't really experienced it in a sense. You do in another way with quiet borderline. Maybe you're like, I can't stay in this relationship because they're always ghosting. They'll have patterns of ghosting often, or they're withdrawing, or there's just these times where like they're not around, or they just won't talk, or they won't interact. All these different things, and or they're doing things behind your back you might discover having to do with addiction and that type of thing, trying to soothe themselves. Or you might find that they're self-harming just in the other room kind of thing. And if you catch them and you try to have their conversation, they'll just justify it. Like, it's like, it's no big deal. I'm just cutting my leg, or whatever the case might be, or arm, or that, or they usually do it in hidden places. People with quiet BPD. But so with this, then you see people sometimes like, if, for example, A quiet borderline woman is saying, I want a baby, I want to really have a baby right now. And a partner may be saying, well, no, like there's a problem here with alcohol that you know of, right? And you're not aware what else is going on with them. And you're like, so no, I mean, I would need to see you drinking less before we could like really get serious about a baby, or maybe before we could move in, or even maybe before we could get married. And then that's going to become somewhat contentious and maybe often talked about. But what people often don't know in these relationships with quiet borderlines is how much you, with some codependency, the quiet borderline, like all borderlines with severe codependency as well, you are enabling this person. And it might be because you don't understand what's really going on for them. And the enabling can really help them from getting the help that they really need because they're drowning inside. They're often doing really, really impulsive, risky, and or pattern behaviors of really self-injurious things and self-sabotaging patterns. The other thing I just want to say quickly in closing here is, and people keep thinking that borderlines, whether quiet or petulant or one of the other two subtypes that we'll be doing a podcast episode on soon, people think that high functioning, people who have BPD and are high functioning, they think, well, that's great, but still high functioning doesn't mean that they can be mutual, reciprocal, that they don't have object constancy, they are not emotionally mature, they really don't know who they are. With all of these core patterns and realities of what borderline personality disorder is, the more that they can be better functioning, like in a job or career, maybe they've gone to school, they're got several degrees, they're very intelligent, they have a lot to offer in many ways with positive qualities, but they still don't know who they are. They still have all the patterns of BPD. You're just not experiencing them. And people with the higher functioning BPD are often harder to treat. They will take longer in therapy because they have more developed defenses, which allows them to, in fact, be higher functioning. So make no mistake about it, the discouraged subtype of borderline personality disorder known as the quiet borderline doesn't make them a, quote, healthier borderline, unquote. Doesn't make them a more mature borderline, or doesn't make them more able to commit or better at communication or actually better at relating. You're sort of being duped, and not on purpose, by all that this person, who may well have told you they have BPD or they think they do, you're like, well, first of all, people don't know what BPD is usually till they get in these relationships. And secondly, even if you know a bit about it, you're like, well, I'm not seeing anything to do with what I've heard about BPD. I've had so many clients say that to me when they're with or they were with a quiet borderline. It's like, well, they weren't yelling at me, they weren't screaming at me, they weren't this, they weren't that. And so I didn't really think that their BPD was a big deal. Unfortunately, BPD always is a big deal when it comes to interpersonal relationships, significant other relationships, them trying to cope with life emotionally as people who don't know themselves and who aren't emotionally the age that they really are, and who are really lacking emotional intelligence in terms of how intellectually intelligent they can be. And how intellectually intelligent they are is not going to help them to apply that to what the healing and therapy that borderlines and quiet borderlines need to be able to find the self and so much more. And so if you've been with a quiet borderline, it's really important to know that if you've unchosen the relationship, you've done the right thing for you. And if you're still with somebody with quiet BPD, and maybe like they want a baby right now, there's something about that feels off. Maybe they are drinking too much. Maybe they are using substances. Maybe you do see the odd time you catch them harming themselves somehow. Maybe they are acting out a whole lot in the sense of, quote, going out to socialize a lot, going out to party a lot, seeming like having a good time and everything, but they're really misusing substances, etc., to keep on trying to soothe what keeps on coming up for them in triggered emotional dysregulation and a whole bunch more that's core pattern BPD that, of course, is happening mostly internally. And that's in the case of a lot of people with quiet BPD. They don't act out. They can act out in some of these other ways, like substance abuse and whatever, but they don't act out at you. But then you're going to notice the withdrawals and maybe feel the silent treatment, and they're just not available for you to even relate to them. Or if they're sitting in front of you, they're just zoned out. They just go in this deep place internally, and then they're not really there to interact with you often. So just know that even the quiet borderline that doesn't have any mix of other type of the subtypes of BPD, and doesn't maybe rage and doesn't yell and seems like a kinder, gentler person, tragically inside they're drowning. And they really aren't who you think they are either. And it's all really rather tragic. But that's my summary and information about why, 10 reasons why, even quiet BPD still destroys relationships.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.